Under a sharp autumn sky, gunfire cracked across the grass and rolled toward the ravines. Horses bolted through lanes of teepees and drying racks. Women seized infants, older children dragged travois, and dogs threaded the smoke with their ears pinned back. A quiet afternoon at a Dakota village near Whitestone Hill turned in a breath. Cavalry crested the ridge and came on at a gallop, carbines shouldered, sabers up. Shots tore canvas and flesh. Fires leapt from lodge to lodge as powder flashes caught. Men tried to pull the soldiers away on fast ponies while families ran. Bodies fell in the lanes. The road to that day began with hunger and broken promises. The previous summer in Minnesota, annuity payments and food owed under treaties failed to arrive. Dakota families stood at agency doors and were turned away while sacks of flour sat in locked warehouses. Anger turned to violence along the Minnesota River. When the Army regained control, military trials followed. 38 Dakota men were hanged at Mankato in December, the largest mass execution in United States history. Survivors were forced into prison camps and then pushed west. Others left ahead of soldiers, seeking buffalo and space to rebuild among kin. Washington wanted the frontier quiet. General John Pope, charged with the region's defense, ordered a campaign into Dakota Territory to remove any threat before winter. 2 columns went out in 1863. General Henry Sibley marched first, fighting along the Missouri and driving bands farther from Minnesota. General Alfred Sully followed with mounted regiments, artillery, and scouts. The instructions were blunt: find the Dakota who had fled and break their ability to return. Late that summer, scouts reported a large village near a low rise the soldiers called Whitestone Hill, in what is now southeastern North Dakota. Teepees dotted the folds of the land by the hundreds. Gardens of corn and squash grew close by. Racks held strips of drying buffalo meat, the season's insurance against the cold. The people there were mostly Yanktonai and Sisseton, with some Hunkpapa and others gathered by kinship and trade. They had come together to prepare for winter. Children played among staked horses, women scraped hides, men repaired saddles and checked lariats. Sully's column reached the area in early September, 1863. Dust rose on the horizon long before the soldiers saw the village. When the first companies topped the ridge, the size of the camp startled them. Orders came fast. Skirmishers spread, guns unlimbered, cavalry angled to cut off escape. At the first shots, mounted men tried to draw soldiers away from the families, circling and firing, then breaking for distance. The ruse bought moments, not safety. Lanes filled with people running and the crash of horses into ropes and poles. The fighting rushed into coulees where vision failed and the ground broke into pockets of violence. A man crawled through willow and rose into a volley. Another thought he had space and rode into a troop on the next rise. Soldiers fired into shapes and movement. Warriors fired from cover when they could, but numbers were heavy and weapons favored blue coats. Shells reached into the heart of the camp. Smoke from burning lodges mixed with powder until the air tasted like metal. Crying cut through it. Children confused by noise and heat. Elders calling names no one could answer in time. By late afternoon, the village lay open. Soldiers drove small groups across the open, chasing them for miles. Many were cut down while running, some while carrying infants on their backs. Others hid in tall grass and were shot where the stalks trembled. Captures multiplied as the light fell. By night, hundreds, mostly women and children, along with elders, were in custody. Troopers pulled down what lodges still stood, chopped poles for fuel, and piled household goods and tools. Food stores went to the flames or into army wagons. Dogs were shot. What could not be carried away was destroyed. In reports written after the smoke cleared, Sully called Whitestone Hill a victory. He wrote that his men had met hostile bands and broken their strength. His estimate of the dead hovered around 100. Survivors remembered differently. They counted bodies in ravines and on open ground, and carried the number for the rest of their lives. Many said the dead ran into the hundreds, and that most were women and children who had no chance to form a line. Army losses were few. The imbalance told the story even when official words softened it. The march back was its own punishment. Captives were herded under guard with little food, many barefoot after the camp was stripped. Some died on the way. Those who survived faced confinement at forts and agencies where disease spread and rations were poor. Families were broken by separation. Names were entered in ledgers that recorded numbers rather than people. Others who escaped the ring of troops pushed across the prairie to find relatives and shelter, traveling at night and using buried caches. Winter came early for anyone without a lodge. For the soldiers, Whitestone Hill fit neatly into orders from above. Columns had moved, contact was made, and the enemy dispersed. In the east, the Civil War still raged, and most Americans never read the dispatches that described a village burned in a place they would never see. On the northern plains, the message was felt in bones. The campaign told every band that standing still was dangerous, that a winter's work could vanish in an afternoon, that the army would reach into camps and call the wreckage success. The ground healed slowly. Charcoal and iron trinkets lay in the dirt for years. Travelers found teepee rings pressed into the prairie, where stones had once held down hides. Children from homesteads that came later picked up beads and scraps of copper without knowing the rooms they came from. Memory split along two paths. In official accounts and on monuments raised by victors, the day remained a battle, unfortunate maybe, necessary in the language of the time. In the stories kept by families who survived, the word was different. It was a massacre. In time, the state marked the place. A memorial stands on the hill. Visitors read plaques and look over gentle slopes where grass hides the lines of flight. If you stand there long enough, you can place the camp in your mind, the clusters of lodges, the drying racks, the gardens, the horses on pickets, the paths to water. Then carry the cavalry over the crest and into that picture. The silence that follows is not empty. It is the weight of what was taken. The story of Whitestone Hill does not turn on strategy. It turns on the fact of loss, food, shelter, safety, and the lives that would have used them through a plains winter. The attack destroyed more than a village. It broke a season and set people moving when weather and land demanded stillness. Soldiers called it a victory because the camp was gone. Families used other words around low fires. They taught their children the names of those who did not return and the places where they ran, so the map of that day would not be lost. More than a century and a half has passed since that afternoon. The hills have not changed shape. The same wind still combs the grass. The distance from the nearest town still feels long when the sky lowers. The records remain, spare and careful, and the testimonies of survivors still cut through phrasing that tried to dull the edges. Stand on that ridge, and the space between the lines closes. What the army wrote as success, families recorded as grief. What officials filed as a battle, descendants remember as a day when a community was torn open and its winter burned on the ground. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.